Paulo Rosado, he had worked in other companies, and something that he realized in his path in the technology industry is that IT never delivered projects on time and on budget. So projects were always delayed, they were always over budget. And this type of risk, so this means risk for the projects, what it does is that it trifles innovation. Because if there's risk, if people are afraid to try new things, or if they cannot move fast enough, innovation suffers. And so we set out in 2001 to solve this problem. And the way we decided to do it, there are multiple approaches you could use. We decided to build a product and to build a platform that would allow people to build applications really fast and with as little knowledge as possible. So this is kind of a diagram of what the OutSystems platform is. It has a lot of components, as you can see. It has an entire part dedicated to monitoring the applications, making sure everything is all right, to doing logging and so on, everything automatically done for you so that you don't have to spend time doing it. A part dedicated to the lifetime of the application, so staging the application from development to QA to production and so on. We have a part that integrates with other systems, right? No application is an island. You always need to connect with other stuff. Even back in 2001, when we started, this was already a requirement. So we have this specific tool to build the integrations. And then we have, of course, the platform server. This is a very important part in terms of innovation, because since we take your application and we deploy it, we can select the type of technology we want underneath. And it's very interesting because this is a feedback we get from customers, is that because we do that, we can, for instance, deploy to containers. And so companies that have a more conservative IT or that don't have the time or the money to invest in new technologies suddenly can use new technologies just by adopting the platform. And they don't have to do anything, right? They take their application. Before they would deploy it to a standard .NET environment, and now they're taking all the advantages of containers, and it's all the same for them. It's just clicking a button and publishing. And the other part, arguably one of the most important parts of the platform, is Service Studio, which is where developers actually build applications and construct them using a visual language. And I'm going to focus quite a bit on this part, on some tips on some learnings we had while developing this visual language that now allows developers to build applications really quickly. This is screenshots of the project back in 2001. We started developing this domain-specific language to build applications. At the time, things were quite kind of different, right? You didn't have mobile apps like you have nowadays. What you had was text messaging applications. I don't know if you remember or if you lived through this. It was kind of like you sent cinema to a service. It would reply back, which cinema do you want? And then you would reply, oh, I want UCI, and it would give you the times of the movies. And so we built a platform that would allow to build this type of applications really fast. We were aiming at the telecommunication industry. We also did a bit of WAP, a bit of web for the back offices and so on. But the point here was, one, that this was designed to be a domain-specific language, so not a general purpose language, although the domain is very large, right? Building applications is quite a large domain. But the other thing is that even with this simple type of applications, there were already design choices that would be very important in the future. So this is kind of how this works. You want to build a screen in the OutSystems platform, you design the screen visually, and then you need to populate the data. And so we have this notion of flows where you design what you want to do. So in this particular case, it's very easy. All you have to do is a query. That query feeds the form, and the form shows to the user. And then you have actions. For instance, when you click the button, you want to save it. You want to make sure everything is all right, if it's a valid email, and then you save it. But as soon as you add a bit of complexity, and so in this example, for instance, what I'm trying to do is have a master detail. On top, I have a list of contacts. When I click a contact, I get the details of the contact. Now the logic becomes a bit more complex. And in this situation, for instance, what I have is, so in the beginning over here, and I'm assuming you can see my mouse cursor, You do this query to get the contacts, and then if you want to show the details, you'll just get them so that they show on the page. Seems simple enough, but I mean, for software developers, suddenly there's a scope problem here, right? Because if you check the type or the data that is available at each point of this flow, by the time you get to the end of the flow, because the get details part was done inside the branch of an if, it's not available on scope. Now, of course, this is not hard to solve, right? You define a global variable, and sorry for the S on the bottom, this was a conversion issue. But you define a global variable like contact details, you can assign it, and suddenly you can use this in the entire flow and therefore on the screen. But this is not very practical because this is actually a very common scenario. This is something that developers do all the time, right? Have a screen with several parts, and those parts depend on conditions and so on. And so we made a design decision here. And the design decision was to make all queries available in the global scope. So we decided that in our language, if you use these things to get data, they are globally available, even before you execute them. This might seem like an odd choice in the sense that it's kind of dirty, right? If you are trying to define a beautiful language, it's kind of dirty, but it's super pragmatic in the sense that everybody understands this. All our developers use this all the time, and they have no doubts about what's going on. And so this is something that we learned very early on when we were creating this local platform, is that it's very important to have a nice balance between what is a beautiful language and being pragmatic in the sense that our goal is to make our developers as productive and as fast as possible. Okay. And by the way, like Stefan, if anyone wants to ask questions in the middle of the presentation, feel free to do so. I'm assuming you will moderate them because I cannot see the chat window or anything. So I will count on you. All right, and also like I said before, we have this big part of integrations, and integrations are also a very interesting thing to design in the language. For integrations, we allow you to extend the core capabilities of the product by coding. So you can just go there and use what we call high code as opposed to low code to develop an action, and then you wrap it up nicely and you can turn it into one of these visual elements that you can use and reuse later on. So this was our approach to extending logic. We also allow to extend, for instance, JavaScript like this. And it served us pretty good. It works pretty good. But the way we did it on the UI was a bit different. To extend the UI, what we did, and because especially in the beginning, we were using a lot of HTML, what we did was we gave you this expression, and now you can say, this is an unescaped expression, type HTML, go wild, do whatever you want, and this will go to the page. And this way you can extend the UI all you want. And this was actually a bad decision. And it was a bad decision for several reasons. But when you are thinking about extensibility, you need to think about, okay, if you are opening this door, let's call it like that, you need to understand that it will hinder your ability to evolve. And by allowing users to type anything there and by using expressions and variables and all of that, it made it really hard for us to then later on to change our minds, to upgrade it to something easier and so on. It would be very hard once we put that out in the wild to take the code that people did using that unescaped expression and, for instance, carve it out. And this, of course, has other problems. So, like I mentioned, this worked because our developers knew we were using HTML. And so they developed in HTML. They would use stuff that we made available in terms of the frameworks that we were using. But what if that changes? Suddenly, all of the applications that had this component would start failing. And of course, then this is terrible for knowledge transfer because, I mean, they would put anything there. It's amazing the amount of code that they could put in this small extensibility. They would put JavaScript, HTML, special tags, everything. And it makes it really hard for then when someone else comes and reads your code, suddenly all the advantages we had in terms of knowledge transfer for having a visual language went away. And so we did the second iteration, much more contained. We isolated the problem. We allowed you to extend tags. Suddenly the preview starts working. It's totally upgradable if you want. If we want to extend the language, we can upgrade these things, and it's a much better choice. And so the lesson here is that you definitely need to support extensibility, but you need to be really careful about the interfaces and the seams that you use. Moral lessons that we learned. We usually, right, we think about developers working alone in their desks, building code and so on, but actually working as teams is much more natural for developers. And we have big teams of 60 or more developers working on several projects. And it was very interesting that in the beginning, we were much more concerned about the development process than the collaboration. But funny enough, some of the tools that we made for the development process are also very important in collaboration. Debugger is one of those that when we started thinking about this and talking with developers, it's a great way for developers to know what the code is doing. And so it's a way of knowledge transfer. Just being able to go step by step, executing the thing, seeing what happens, gives them the information they need to understand the code. So this was very exciting to see, especially because we invested a lot in this debugger. It was kind of an interesting technical challenge to implement this debugger. So it was very good to see it used in several factions. And then, of course, if you have multiple persons developing, they will need to merge the code. And this was, again, something that we invested a lot. It's funny because this had a bunch of iterations since the beginning. We've been trying to evolve and making this every time a bit better. But it's a real tough challenge to make visual merges, but I think we did here a good job. And actually, we think this is so important and so core to the language that we filed a patent because we think that we had here a very good solution to allow developers to work together. And that's kind of the point, is that development is much more a team sport than an isolated sport. So you need, when you do this type of languages, when you think about this, you really need to think about how people are going to collaborate. And then in the beginning, so that screenshot that I showed you, we were very much focused on implementing stuff. So implementing, having developers build an application, that was our main focus. But very quickly, we understood that it's not only about that. You need to do all the other steps in the software development lifecycle, right? You need to implement, then you need to test it. You need to take that application, move it into production. Then you need to monitor it, make sure everything is all right, so that you then can continue this iteration of innovation. And that needs to be made fast. And we did that. So we have, like I mentioned, this tool called Lifetime, where you can very quickly, with a one button, move an application between environments. So you can have something in development, move it to QA, and then to production. We automatically monitor all the applications to make sure that, for instance, in terms of performance, things are going well. We are strong believers that performance is usability. And so we want our applications to perform well. We have all of these indicators and so on. The funny part here was that until we started thinking about the whole software development lifecycle, we did not have the concept of an application. We never needed, when you were developing, we had this notion of module, but we never needed the notion of an application. This was something that we only needed to create when we moved to these other facets of the software development lifecycle. And that was a very interesting thing to see. In this example, it was the application. It's a concept that it impacts all of these stages of the software development. And so when we are designing the language, when we are thinking about new stuff that we add, we really need to have this in consideration, understand how they will impact the full cycle. And that was really a very interesting lesson. And also, So as you might have guessed, in 2001, we were kind of in a rush to launch a product, right? And in the beginning, so this is an example of, or this is the first version of what we had as our query editor. So if you need to make a query to the database, this is how you would do it. You'd put here the entity, like here I'm querying the department, the ID, and so on. We have the conditions. You can probably see that this is very ugly, right? And also not super usable, because this is essentially a window into the model. So it's like, if it's like the developer was tweaking the model directly. There is no properly done UI and so on. We needed to do it like this. We were very much in a rush, right? Because we wanted to launch. And then you have this and you compile it. Now, the problem is that data, as you might guess, it's something that's very important for applications, right? So we want to give it a bit more care. And that model that I showed you wouldn't support simple stuff, like, for instance, doing a group by and having an aggregate function, like doing an average or a count or whatever. So something as simple as that was not possible to do on that. So we took this opportunity to rethink a bit the way we were doing things, and we separated what we have as the visual interaction and the model. So we assumed they were two totally different things. And this seems kind of obvious, but it's one of those things that is very easy to skip. But what this allowed us to do was, first, it allowed us to make a model that was much more future-proof. So this model supports everything. This model that we designed supports all types of data. It supports unstructured data. We could use a document database here and have like JSON. So we designed it considering all that. We designed it considering, for instance, that these sources don't need to be database tables. They can be anything. They can be a REST API, whatever. So we have a very powerful model underneath. And then on top, we designed the thing that we wanted to design. So the UI, we believe that people are more familiar with Excel, so we made this tabular. The interface is similar. You have options. You can group stuff. But the interesting part is that actually, it's not possible to use all the capabilities that the model offers in this interaction, because there are some stuff we still haven't designed. It's very hard to design something to, for instance, access an unstructured database. But it's there, it's ready for the future. And we can suddenly do a change on this interaction, or even have one on the side, right? Because if you have a common model, you can have two different editors. It's fine. We have this capability. It's very powerful for us, and it allows us to move very fast on this interface. And of course, then it has other advantages, like, for instance, we can optimize the model. So we are not dependent on the developer to make the most optimal decision in terms of how to join the tables and so on. We can do it for the developer. And not all the time, the UI, what the developer sees, it's all the same. So this was a very interesting lesson, this separation between the model and the interaction to manipulate the model. Okay. And then suddenly, like I mentioned, in 2001, there were no mobile apps. This was something that showed much later. And so we wanted to support that. Of course, everybody that was building an application had a web application and then a mobile application to support it. And the big challenge there was that it was a totally different architecture. So we were building for web, and the way that mobile applications work is quite different. And it's actually different in many ways. One of them is, for instance, the life cycle. The life cycle of a web application is completely different of a mobile application. And so what we did was we took a big jump here, and we decided to make an entire new model and really redesign the language. And this is kind of a curse and a blessing, right? It's a curse because it's a lot of trouble. Now you need to explain to your customers that you have two things. For instance, just that bit is enough to be complex and to make the wholesale much more complex. It's very hard to transform between models, right? So you start having two, and you have this problem that you start from zero in terms of mileage, in the sense that the other system had been tested by customers for more than a decade. So it was pretty stable. And now you make a new system, and suddenly the quality it goes back again. It's unavoidable. And so there is this thing called the second system syndrome that most software developers suffer, which is if I build something on the side, it's going to be 10 times better than the one that exists, and it will have no problems. And we were kind of afraid of falling on that. But in the end, we decided to do it because the other system had been designed 15 years ago. And so there are times where you really need to to go with it and just bite the bullet and say, look, thank you so much. It's been a great ride, but now we need to change. And it was also very aligned with the new trends. And also we started thinking about the future and how we could apply the new model, and it made a lot of sense. So in the end, I think it was a good decision, but it's one of those very hard decisions when you decide to go with the second system. But the fact of the matter is that it allowed us to suddenly enter in a completely new space, in the space of the mobile applications. These are the Gartner quadrants where OutSystems is positioned. It's only until 2018 because then this quadrant was renamed to something else, where we are also, of course. But I just put here the evolution that we had along these years. So it was a courageous choice, but it was a very good choice to go with this second system. So sometimes you really need to go that path. So where are we today? I'm very happy that we've been having an impact in so many industries and countries. So we have around 1,600 customers in a lot of countries, in a lot of industries, a lot of developers using our platform, giving us enormous feedback. So that's been very exciting to see the platform so used. And this low code really has an impact in terms of business, but also in terms of innovation. So I love this example of Hermes. So this is like a company that tracks parcels, and especially now in these COVID times, they had a spike in usage and so on. And suddenly they can take a platform and they have a business idea and they can implement that idea or the first draft of that idea in just 1 week and a few days. And this is a great way for companies to use software to innovate, right? Building these prototypes really quickly, testing an idea, seeing if it works. And then if it works, they then implemented the full solution and used it and they implemented over a couple of months, all of this to control the supply chain. And then, of course, the examples that for me personally that make me happier is also when we see that the impact of the applications we have helping out other people. So we have this example that the Red Cross Netherlands built a mobile application to help with the management of volunteers, so that volunteers could be paired with tasks that were need to be done. And suddenly, after 6 weeks development, we deployed an application that helps these many people be much more effective in helping other people. So this was it's very heartwarming to see that the platform is used in these situations. And we also had a bunch of examples of this during COVID, of companies using OutSystems. We offered some platforms to non-profits so that they could help. And this is really something that makes me really happy to see happening. And yeah, so what's next? In terms of the way we see the world, we definitely believe that this trend of companies having to use software to innovate is here to stay. The nature of software is changing a lot, of course, but the trend it's here to stay. And so there are always ways in which we can improve the productivity of developers. And this is something we are always working on, trying to understand how we can help developers be more effective. And this is about designing the language. It's about understanding the use cases, the most common use cases, and accelerating them. It's about giving them the right tools at the right time. So there is a lot to do in here. We are actually right now understanding also how do you measure productivity, which in itself is a very interesting challenge that we've been doing. We believe that the cloud architectures are here to stay. So we are talking about not only what we already support in terms of containers, but also serverless and so on. And again, having a low-code platform is really helpful here because it means that you can jump through these technology waves with minimal impact, right? You just need to take your application, redeploy it, and suddenly it's running on the new stack. And we definitely believe that AI it's going to help a lot in this journey of building these applications. Because we've been here for so long and have so many customers, we have a huge data set of applications that are built, of use cases that people use, of patterns, both good and bad, of how people build enterprise software. And so we are taking all of that and doing a bunch of stuff like, for instance, the basic, right? Suggest what's the next thing that they want to do. And so instead of having to go to the menu and all, it accelerates. But more than that, it's, for instance, we have been designing and working on a service that can detect the use case you are trying to develop based on your application. And so if we understand what you're trying to do, we can give you very specific help on how to achieve that result, either because we have components that already do it, or because we have a use case of someone else that did it, and give you that example. And then, of course, also making sure that we warn you when you are going into a path of development that's not so good, either because the architecture will have problems, either because it's slow, and so on. So these are all things that we are seeing happening and are working on. And finally, the other thing that it's something that we aim to do is make this accessible to everyone. So ideally, everyone could be an application developer. So if you have an idea, it doesn't matter to me if you are a developer, a business person, if you are a nurse, if you are a guy working. We have an example actually of a company that what they do is they pick apples and they they sell apples, right? And so they have these mechanisms and they use IoT. And these people that were there in the factory were able to use our platform to automate part of it using IoT, which was really interesting because they had no development background. They went and learned the platform and they did it. And that's what we want to do. In the future, we would love that anybody that wants to build an application can build it and then have this AI help and can build something and, I mean, make their ideas come true. So these are the things that we are seeing as the future ahead for OutSystems and for our local platforms. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening. I don't know if there are any questions, comments, suggestions.